Welcome to the program, friend. July 4th will soon be upon us. And when you read what happened to the colonists in the 1760s and 1770s that led to the American Revolution, boy, it's almost like today's headlines are a troubling and frightening echo. God, where are we headed? Well, I'll tell you this. If we're going to go forward into troubled times, we can use the guiding lights of Patrick Henry and Thomas Jefferson and George Washington.
Those who forsake the law praise the wicked. Those who uphold the law resist them. Welcome to the Voice of Resistance. Here's your host, Randall Terry.
Welcome to the program, friend. I hope that you and your family are well and that your preparations for anything that it is you do on the 4th of July are in fine order. And I thought that it would be good on this July 3rd and 4th to take a look at the Declaration of Independence. I'm actually going to read the entire document. We're going to look at the 4 places in the document that God is referred to, give body and meaning to those references to the Almighty, and look at some of the reasons that the colonists were willing to pick up arms against their fellow British citizens. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, this is somewhat germane today, perhaps more than it's ever been in America, because, as we have covered on this show, a few months ago, a university did a very significant poll in which 29% of the Americans who answered it believed that a physical, violent revolution would be necessary to protect our liberties. Stunningly, 44% of the Republicans in that poll said that they believed a revolution would be necessary to preserve our liberties. That means that nearly half of registered Republicans are so alarmed and so, dare I say, afraid of our own government that they believe we cannot fix this at the ballot box. Whether it's judicial tyranny or the tyranny of this current administration with its horrific spying program, whether it's the ineptness of Congress, whether it's all of the above at state government levels, people are getting very, very nervous. And the fact that such a high percentage of Americans believe that it may be necessary to have a revolution in order to preserve our liberties, that fact behooves us to look at the Declaration of Independence and to look at the things that happened that led up to the Revolutionary War. So, that's what I'm going to do. This is hand-picked little snippets out of history, but the purpose of it is to give you a framework. Maybe you've heard of the Sons of Liberty. Maybe you've heard of the Committees of Correspondence. Maybe you've heard of the Stamp Act. Maybe you've heard of the Boston Massacre, the shot heard round the world, give me liberty or give me death. There were all these landmarks, guideposts, if you will, that were happening that culminated with the signing of the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. So, let's start with the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act was passed in 1765. The British said, wow, we're in some serious debt because of the 7 Years' War between the French and the English, and the Americans were protected by our soldiers, and therefore they should have to foot some of the bill. Well, there is some sound logic in that, but the problem is that the colonists did not have any representatives in Parliament, and Parliament was determined that they not get them. And the British Constitution basically said that you could not tax a British citizen unless he had representation in Parliament. So imagine an area of America where there were no U.S. House of Representatives, and not including Washington, D.C., but like, say, New Mexico. And New Mexico has to submit to all the laws that are passed, but New Mexico has no representation. Well, of course that would be an outrage. And of course, the American colonists said, no, we're not going to do that. Well, the Stamp Act was designed to force Americans to have legal documents processed on paper that had an embossed stamp from Britain. So if you wanted to sell a piece of property and have a transfer deed, the deed was not to be recognized unless the embossed stamp was on the paper. There were many legal instruments such as that, well, to function in commerce and in family life, you had to have legal documents. And if the document had to have the Stamp Act on it, it was a way to ensure that the Brits would get the money that they wanted. Well, the Americans said, I don't think so. I don't think so. So what'd they do? When we come back from this break, I'll tell you, it was pretty intense. It was a little scary.
You have two choices. I mean, you can try to raise your children by design, or you will raise them by default. There are no perfect parents. We're going to get it wrong sometimes. If we have a plan, we've got a better chance of getting it right in the long run.
There is something deep within the heart of every human being that longs for parental acceptance and approval. When does a boy become a man?
Get a group of guys around and ask them that question.
I don't think there's a certain age. Some men stay boys their whole life.
I would say, 16, 18 years old.
Wow, that's a good question.
When they get bar mitzvah.
Well, I think when he has a child. So I just became at 56, 56 years old.
Without the power of the Holy Spirit changing us and giving us power over our sin, we can't hope to be the dads that our kids need us to be.
I have been a leader in the pro-life movement for 30 years. And sadly, we have not prevailed in our goal to make it a criminal act to kill an unborn baby. There's reasons why we have failed. I wrote this book, A Humble Plea, to Catholic bishops, to evangelical clergy, and to lay people, explaining where we went wrong and what we have to do to prevail. We've made this available as a PDF online for free. I encourage you to go and download your own copy. Hi friend, I'm Randall Terry. George Washington said, government is not reason, it is not eloquent, it is force. Like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. Welcome back to the program, friend. For the sake of history, because it's interesting, I am going to read to you from the actual legislation that the British Parliament passed concerning the Stamp Act. So you can see how onerous, how enraging this piece of legislation was. And they had to be paid, these stamps had to be paid by British money, not American money. So, for every skin or piece of vellum or parchment or sheet or piece of paper on which shall be engrossed, written, or printed any declaration, plea, replication, rejoinder, demur, or other pleading, or any copy thereof, in any court of law within the British colonies and plantations in America, a stamp duty of 3 pence. So if you had any legal proceeding whatsoever, all right, a lot of legal proceedings, you got to have the British stamp, and they would actually affix the stamp. For every skin or piece of vellum or parchment or sheet or piece of paper on which shall be engrossed, written, or printed any special bail and appearance upon such bail in any such court, a stamp duty of 2 shillings. For every skin, piece of vellum, parchment, sheet of paper, for any petition, bill, answer, claim, plea, replication, rejoinder, demur in any court or chancery, a duty of 1 shilling and 6 pence. Look, they even got into church matters. Listen to this one. For every skin, piece of paper, etc., any printed, any monition, libel, answer, allegation, inventory, or renunciation in ecclesiastical matters, in any court of probate court of the ordinary or any other court exercising ecclesiastical jurisdiction within the said colonies, a stamp duty of 1 shilling. So if there's any fighting between the churches or an issue of law that involved a pastor or a clergyman, the government says, we're going to tax you for that. The list is huge. It is huge. We're down to, there were 54 different places that the government of Great Britain required the stamp to be affixed on legal documents. They sent the stamps to 4 separate ports. In one of the ports, the tax collector, as he was going to be, was hung in effigy. All right? Hung in effigy, really close to his house. For you, those of you who don't know, that means that someone made a mannequin, made it look like him, and then put a noose around its neck and hung it from a tree, saying to him, if you do this, you will die. He resigned the next morning. In another one of the ports, the stamps were taken literally and thrown overboard. They were all destroyed. There was physical, at times forceful intervention from the colonists to the degree that the money was never collected. That's how fierce and intense the uprising was against the Stamp Act. And within a year, the Parliament said, all right, fine. They retracted the law. They passed another law suspending it. But they said, we retain the right to have jurisdiction over the colonies in all matters, including taxation, whatsoever. So at that point, even though the American colonies were successful in keeping the Stamp Act from being implemented, wish we could keep Obamacare from being implemented, the British government said, we're going to fight this fight another day. And the American colonists understood that. Now that was 1765, 11 years before the Declaration of Independence was signed and the Revolution began. The point of the matter is that it did not happen overnight. The colonists didn't wake up one morning and go, hey, let's have a revolution. I don't want to be a British citizen anymore. It took years of intrusion into the rights of people and draconian measures from the British government without the colonists having representation. And they finally snapped on July 4th when they signed the Declaration and said, no more, we're not going to do this anymore. When we come back from this break, we'll talk, say about the Townsend Acts and maybe the Boston Tea Party. Because I just love tea and I love parties. Do you want to get America out of the hands of wicked and unjust men and women who are destroying the republic before our eyes, and put leadership back into the hands of righteous men and women so that we don't die as a nation? Well, you're talking about social revolution, and there are rules in social revolution. We can look at the victorious social revolutions of the past, such as the end of slavery, the end of child labor, women's voting rights, the end of segregation, and so much more, and learn from their victories. Look at their actions, their images, their rhetoric, their sacrifices, and their final fruit. We will send you this series that originally cost $129, 7 books for students, 1 teacher's guide, if you'll give a gift of any size and just pay for shipping and handling. Take advantage of it today. Hi friend, I'm Randall Terry. Thomas Jefferson said, "A Bill of Rights is what the people are entitled to against every government, and what no just government should refuse or rest on inference." Welcome back to the program, friend. The Townsend Act was passed a year later, 1767, and this time the British government thought they would tax paper and glass and lead and, of course, tea. Well, the colonists were infuriated by that. They refused to pay the tax, so the British ended up repealing the Townsend Act. Everything was not to be taxed that was originally to be taxed except for tea. Tea. Yes. They thought, all right, we're gonna hold the line. We're gonna show them that we have the power and the authority to tax them. And they even orchestrated in such a way that the tea with the tax would be cheaper than tea that didn't have the tax. All right? Smooth move. The colonists saw what was going on and said, we are not going to let this happen. And so Samuel Adams and other patriots had a big meeting at Faneuil Hall, and a ship rolled into port in December of 1773. 7,000 people were there, chanting, booing, demanding that the tea not be brought ashore. And within a day or two, they had an emergency meeting at Faneuil Hall. Very, very beautiful building. If you ever get to go there in Boston, it's still there. And a couple hundred men dressed up, painted their faces as Indians. So some of the colonists were inside of Faneuil Hall ranting and raving against this infringement on their rights. And some of these Indians came through the hall and walked down through the middle and then exited through another door. And they came in holding tomahawks over their heads, dressed as Indians, and they walked through in total silence. Everyone in the room was in total silence. This was high drama, great street theater. And they proceeded directly to the harbor. And there were so many of them, the ship's captain basically begged, he said, please, please, just don't destroy the ship. And in total silence, except for the sound of axes breaking through the boxes, the colonists, dressed as Indians, proceeded to take every single crate of tea and smash it to smithereens and then to dump it into the salt water. One man tried to steal a little bit of the tea, and somebody there realized it, grabbed him, roughed him up, took all the tea and threw it into the ocean. The colonists said, no, we're not stealing this, we're destroying it. In modern money, it would have been $1.2 million worth of tea. $1.2 million. Now, for those of you that are Tea Party activists like myself, oh, look at the pretty dragon. I want you to think about what the Tea Party movement is named after. It's named after a criminal act. They committed a crime, all right? Vandalism, the destruction of property. Do you really want to be named after such an extreme act? I do. The simple fact of the matter is that there have been times in American history where a move towards acts of extremism were part and parcel to obtaining freedom and to fighting back tyranny. When the Stamp Act was passed, which I referred to in the last segment, Patrick Henry, a young lawyer at that point, long before his "Give me liberty or give me death" speech, stood up in Parliament and said and gave the words what are now referred to as his treasonous speech. And he said, King Charles had his Cromwell, Caesar had his Brutus, and King George, because people thought, oh my gosh, he's going to talk about someone assassinating King George. And people were screaming, treason, treason. And he said, and King George would do well to learn from their example. If this be treason, make the most of it. So, all of that to say this, I have to take a break. We are in very desperate times. I led Operation Rescue. I've been arrested almost 50 times for peaceful protest. I've spent over a year of my life locked up. I know the humiliation of being strip searched. I know the humiliation of being told to stand still while guards sprayed down your body with chemicals in case there's lice. I mean, it's just unpleasant. I've been sued repeatedly, had everything taken from me by the lawyers of Planned Parenthood and the National Organization of Women. Had to pay a price. But friend, If you look at the American Revolution, if you look at what it took for us to become a free people, I can tell you this for certain. We are not going to restore this public with tweets and Facebook and hanging out in the cyber ghetto and blogs. It is going to require boots on the ground. It's going to require activism. It's going to require perhaps extreme acts, such as in the Boston Tea Party. And one more word to our detractors. You can't have it both ways. You cannot say that the Boston Tea Party was an act of valor and patriotism and was just, and then turn around and condemn people who are standing up for liberty in this day using the tools and the rhetoric that we have at our disposal. I'll be right back. Don't go away. We have put together what we call an online university for you. Now that's a highfalutin way of saying that we have a pretty significant library of material, books, tapes, videos that are there for you for free. Why are we doing this? Because America is desperate for new leaders, and because this material could help you to become the leader that you and God want you to be. Check it out and enjoy it. What is the purpose of righteous government? And when is it appropriate for people to revolt against their government? I answer these questions and many others in my book, The Sword, which I wrote when I was a federal prisoner. Rob Shearer, the owner of Greenleaf Press, says this is one of the 10 most important books that a Christian can read today. If you want a book that is timely and timeless in its principles regarding government and revolution, get a copy of The Sword. Democracy is a very bad form of government, except for all the others that have been tried from time to time. Sir Winston Churchill. Lovely. Well, to finish with our study, the colonists behaved badly. The British were enraged and demanded that those responsible for the destruction of the tea be brought to justice. The colonial powers disagreed. There were no grand efforts found to determine the guilty. No one was arrested or prosecuted. This led the British Parliament to pass a series of laws and for the King himself to order ships to come and to seal off Boston Harbor. If we cannot find the guilty in a court of law, we'll find them in the streets, half starved to death. This, of course, enraged the colonists. And you may remember a fine young man named Patrick Henry, who in March of 1775 said that the clanging of our chains can now be heard in Boston, which was under siege from the British, in his famous "Give me liberty" or "Give me death" speech. Well, the colonists decided they would arm themselves and that they would stand and fight. The British were not to be trifled with. And so on April 18th, they proceeded to Lexington, on their way to Concord to seize firearms. Those naughty colonists had guns and ammunition and gunpowder. The shot heard round the world was fired in Lexington Square on April the 19th. They proceeded from there to try to get the armaments which were bevied in Concord. It was there that the Patriots routed the British soldiers, and the American Revolutionary War had begun in earnest. A year before the Declaration of Independence was signed. In tomorrow's program, I shall read that filthy rag, the Declaration of Independence, just to show you what a bad insurrection looks like. Until then, enjoy your tea